The shit is at my neck, it just got me to the point where I want me a cigarette, I want a Newport.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. We're pleased that you've joined us today or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from around the world. The Fowler is proud to present today's program, Predatory Visual Marketing by Big Tobacco. It's part of our Share the Mic series, which features thought leaders, artists, activists, and allies who are guiding us along the arc of justice. Many artworks by Ghanaian painter Almighty God feature textual variations on a campaign against smoking. I will stop smoking for it kills gradually is frequently included alongside images of animals, celebrities, plants, and even personified cigarettes, preaching a mantra of conversion to everyone passing by the Almighty God artwork studio. Almighty God was aware of the Major 91 legal case in the United States that documented and accused R.J. Reynolds, Camel's parent company, of targeting and attracting youth to the cigarette brand by marketing Joe Camel as hip and cool. Today, we are hosting a moderated panel discussion inspired by Almighty God's anti-smoking artworks currently on view in the Fowler's galleries. Moderated by Fowler's curator of African arts, Erica P. Jones, experts in public health and community organizing through artivism will discuss the predatory visual marketing strategies employed by Big Tobacco in both the US and Africa, the resulting impact on and resistance by targeted Black communities, and the capacity of street art to reflect and reinforce the values of a community. Before we get going, a bit about our panelists. Tracy Brown is an independent curator, artivist, capacity building consultant, and community worker. Born in San Francisco, California, she received her MA in Arts Politics from the Tisch School of the Arts at New York University. Brown curated Same Game, Different Smokers, an exploration of the aggressively pernicious relationship between the tobacco industry and the Black community for the past 400 plus years. She was formerly project manager and resident artivist for the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Dr. Arti Singh is a public health physician and faculty in epidemiology and global health at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. She's also a research fellow for the Global Challenges Research Fund's Tobacco Control Capacity Program for Ghana. Her research interests include non-communicable diseases with a main focus on tobacco control in Ghana. She has researched secondhand smoke exposure, illicit tobacco trade, cigarette warning labeled, and tobacco industry interference in Ghana. Finally, Erica P. Jones is curator of African arts at the Fowler Museum. She received her PhD in art history at UCLA, specializing in African art. Since joining the Fowler in 2015, Jones has organized multiple exhibitions, among them Pansula for Life in 2017, Maleko Mokosi, Bread, Butter, and Power in 2018, Inheritance, recent video art from Africa in 2019, and On Display in the Walled City, the Nigerian Pavilion at the British Empire Exhibition, 1924 to 1925 in 2019. Few quick technical bits of housekeeping. When screen sharing begins, please click view options and then select side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover the presentation. And if you have questions during this program, please do submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. Okay, that's all from me. Over to you, Erica.
Thank you, Bianca. Today, I'm just going to give us a very brief introduction into, a little context why we're having this program today, and a little look at the work of Almighty God. So this program was inspired by a group of works in the recently opened exhibition, How Do You See This World? The Art of Almighty God. Here we go. So this exhibition focuses on the work of the Ghanaian painter Kwame Akoto, who you see on the left here, who's the proprietor of Almighty God Artworks, and who, after years of running his business, has come to be known to his friends and acquaintances alike as Almighty. Everyone just calls him Almighty. So initially, his studio really focused on commercial arts. They made signs for small businesses, cloth banners for evangelical events, portraits on tin for grave monuments, and silkscreen memorial t-shirts for funerals. And the business still produces many of these types of work today. Yet as the production of signage has become much more digital, Almighty has started to devote more of his time to what he calls his creativity arts. And these are works that are not intended as advertising, but produced primarily for an international clientele. And you'll see some of these on display in the image on the right, which is a view of part of Almighty's studio. These creativity arts, these address an astonishing array of subjects. They're really fantastic. From Christian themes and homages to Ghana, to visual textual essays on world problems and visions of demons, the devil, and even hell. It's a really wide-ranging subject matter. So Almighty and his paintings provide really ample commentary on the human condition. And he focuses on problems and issues on a global scale, as well as more personal problems that affect families and friends and individuals. And one of the most pervasive world problems, according to Almighty, is the global addiction to cigarette smoking. And here I'm just showing you one installation view from the exhibition. So this is a little taste of what you'd see if you come by the Fowler to see the show. For nearly 30 years, Almighty has worked on an extensive series of paintings that constitute a campaign against smoking. A former smoker himself, after his conversion, he came to see smoking as unhealthy and unchristian. Almighty's first work in this series was painted in 1993, and we see it here. It featured Joe Camel, who is the logo / mascot of Camel cigarettes. And it was a response to this 1991 report that Bianca mentioned at the beginning on cigarette companies targeting young consumers. The image of Joe Camel had been on every package of Camel cigarettes since 1913. And interestingly, rather than depict the actual mascot, Almighty here has chosen to base this painting on a 1974 caricature by Billy Colton, a British artist. So sort of further lambasting the figure of Joe Camel. The I Will Stop Smoking series grew from this initial painting. It grew to include men, and I say specifically men, because when he was asked in 2006 why he doesn't seem to paint women in this series, Almighty apparently responded, and I quote, "That is not a problem." So there were men, there are animals, and even plants smoking beneath this text that voices a variation on this titular sentiment of I will stop smoking. In the current exhibition at the Fowler, the menagerie of animals includes, I sort of love this list, a rabbit, rooster, dog, bear, cow, parrot, ox, lamb, pigs, cat, elephant, tiger, and a fish, even smoking underwater. So while our collection at the Fowler tends to heavily represent smoking paintings that are drawn from the animal kingdom, I just wanted to show you two others that are not in our collection, because Almighty has also chosen to depict such flora as cabbages, tomatoes, peppers, and onions, all smoking, and again, voicing the sentiment of I must stop smoking, I will stop smoking. While the Joe Camel painting and maybe a dozen or so of the early pieces in this series were painted by Almighty, these paintings very quickly took on a really important role in his studio as a means of training his apprentices. And here you see a couple images of apprentices at work. And unfortunately, we didn't have any images of them working on these specific types of paintings, but you can see sort of how this is a really incredible node for training young artists. Almighty has had a substantial number of students and apprentices work in his studio over the years, many of whom have gone on to open very successful studios themselves. So this series has served as really perfect training because it allows these apprentices to practice their lettering skills. You see all of these have lettering on them as they paint this characteristic statement about smoking, and they are able to work on their copying skills as they learn to paint human and animal forms from previously published examples. So I want to end before we turn to our presenters today on what is honestly, this is my favorite of this series. This was actually commissioned from Almighty. At one point when someone was speaking with him and they said, what would it be like if you painted a cigarette, smoking a cigarette? And this is what he came up with. It's just fantastic. So I want to end with a quote from Almighty in, speaking about this series. And he says, quote, "I know and I believe that these signboards have changed many people, if not now, in the future. This writing is helping mankind. With this drawing, I am preaching." So those are the words of Almighty in 2006. So that's a brief introduction to the smoking paintings in this exhibition.
Thank you very much, Erica. I really appreciate that. And now I'm going to hand it off to Tracy Brown.
All right. Greetings, everyone. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am a visual artist and artivist. And I want to pause really quickly and say I give thanks to the Most High, to the Holy Spirits, to the ancestors for the opportunity to come here to speak to you today. So I have to definitely give my acknowledgments. The title of my presentation today is Sweet Sexy Brain Poison, right? And that's actually a double entendre. Nicotine is one of the most toxic of all poisons, and it can actually rewire the brain, which is why it's particularly bad for youth, because their brains are developing from adolescence during their adolescence in their mid-20s. So if you're smoking, that causes a problem. This presentation is also about the toxic, not only about the toxic nature of nicotine products, but it's also about the tainted perceptions that we can gain from the manipulative use of imagery. So let's take it on back to the early days. The early tobacco ads included very stereotypical derogatory images of Black people. So early tobacco ads that featured Black people included these very negative images. Oh, you know what? I'm tripping. Here I am just talking and not even realizing I was not sharing my screen. Good gravy, Marie. Okay, here we go. In the early days, the images were stereotypical, somewhat derogatory images of Black people. And we know that these types of images fed narratives of Black inhumanity that allowed people to continually justify the perpetrating atrocities against us as Black people. These images were also intended to sell ideas of not only Black inferiority, but of white supremacy, like the myth of the dashing, benevolent, and invincible white man versus the African savages, right? Those are ideas that were pushed to us, and they reinforced the white supremacist ideas while also feeding Black self-hatred. So many Black people would see these images and hear other things in the mainstream discourse, and it would make them want to disassociate from Africa, right? You think about, like, good gravy, Marie, good old white supremacy is everywhere. It's like worse than beach sand, it just gets in everything and in the strangest places. And just when you think you cleaned it out, you unzip something and you're looking and you're like, good gravy, Marie, there's white supremacy in here too. And you try to dump it out, but it never leaves. So you have to do what you can to educate yourself and be diligent against these ideas that are promoted, very harmful ideas being promoted. So let's fast forward to the 1940s and early 50s. The Black community at this time was identified as a market segment, and the tobacco ads, there was a shift in tobacco ads that featured Black people to these ads with these beautiful images of prominent Black people doing things that you could be proud of. Athletes and doctors and police chiefs and people who were looked upon as prominent members of community, and those people existed previously, but they were never featured in these ads. So these images are being fed to people who are absolutely starving for positive images of themselves, and the ads feel uplifting at a glance when you see yourself featured. And even this in this ad on the right, you see the person is referred to as a man who thinks for himself. You didn't see that previously. Oftentimes in society, Black men were called boy. So folks are starving for positive images of themselves that feel respectful, but in actuality, these images are made problematic because of the insertion of these poisonous products. So now your mind associates these poisonous products with being featured with prominence. So it's like the ultimate poison apple. There's apple in a poison apple, but it's still poison. So now let's go to the Roaring 20s. Menthol cigarettes are invented by accident by Lloyd Spud Hughes, who's a white man. The first menthol cigarettes are Spud brand cigarettes, right? He invented these cigarettes and then he marketed them. And they were marketed as a product for upscale whites. Brown and Williamson, a corporation, saw the money rolling in and they created Cool cigarettes with Willie the Penguin, who's this top hat wearing, cane carrying, wearing a monocle, sort of class conscious penguin. And some say that he's even the prototype for the Batman villain, the Penguin. So menthol marketing towards Black people combined imagery associated with refreshment, etc., and these beautiful images. And they started in about the 1950s, because again, 1940s, late 40s, early 50s, Black community is identified as a market segment. This is 25 years after the invention of menthol cigarettes. So that debunks this ridiculous idea that menthol cigarettes are the Black cigarette. Black people do not have a cigarette. We don't have our own cigarette, and no cigarette or nicotine product is a part of our culture. So that needs to be made very clear. That is a myth. It is a lie. And anytime you hear it, you'll know to be suspicious of the speaker. More Black people smoke menthols because of heavily targeted marketing, not because of natural inclination. At that same time, the founding of the Johnson Publishing Johnson Publishing happened. So in 1942, and I believe in 1945, Johnson Publishing launches Ebony magazine. Now this is a still from the show What's Happening, and this is what a typical living room in my life looked like, except you needed like industrial strength plastic covering the furniture. But this was a typical living room in my life. And what you see on the coffee table is an Ebony magazine. It had pride of place in our home spaces and in our lives. Now, Ebony and Jet were two of the most popular publications. And they were important, trusted friends for those of us in the community. They featured stories about celebrities that you wanted to know about and everybody you wanted to be. We can look through the magazine and marvel at the beauty queens from the historical Black colleges and universities. We could also shop for wigs and bell-bottom jumpsuits. But Big Tobacco capitalized on the sparsity of capital available to finance publications like these, as well as to sponsor sporting events and concerts. And they advertised heavily to the Black community. In addition to flooding our publications and our event spaces, they would show up in spaces and at hosting events and literally hand out free cigarettes like you see here in the upper left corner. They also flooded our neighborhoods with cheap, sweet flavored options and hella signage. There was cigarette signage everywhere, including places like behind this horse that that children used to ride. But we've never taken this lying down. Someone has always been leading the resistance against these images being shared in our community. So there was an artivist named Mandrake in Chicago. He would paint over the alcohol and tobacco signs in his community, and he would take other folks, including children, out to carry out these community actions. Mandrake and as well as Reverend Calvin Butts would take children out to participate in this community action because they saw how harmful it was to have our community exposed to these images. Mandrake succeeded in removing 700 billboards, 500 of which advertised tobacco and alcohol within 500 feet of schools. There's also Hank Willis Thomas, who's an amazing artist who has a series called Fair Warning. And he extracted the images and cigarettes from the advertisements and interrogated or invited us to interrogate what ideas were really being sold. Now, it's estimated that approximately 47,000 African Americans die yearly based on an older FDA report. About 47,000 African American people die every year from tobacco-induced illness. In this industry, if you have most of your best customers dying because of your product, you're going to need new customers. Guess what? Same tactics, different population. Low prices, pop culture advertising, and flavors, including and especially menthol. Menthol is a flavor. Okay, so they not only want to attract and cultivate new customers, they want to keep the old ones from quitting. Most young people want nothing to do with cigarettes, but they're amenable to things like vaping, hookah, flavored tobacco, blunt wrappers, and even snus, the pouch you stick between your teeth and your gums. I'm like, really? You want to be spitting in a can? That is really not sexy. That's absolutely not a good look. We also, with the imagery, see, the more things change, the more they say the same. On the left, you see an image of Jim Crow, who is a minstrel character from the 1800s and who is featured in the song Jim Crow. So Jim Crow is the character that the system of segregation was named after. And then on the right, you see this image from the Newport Pleasure series. And here's a guy definitely busting a Jim Crow. Recreation of very racist imagery in advertising is nothing new, and it is not exclusive to the tobacco industry, but it definitely gives you pause and makes you think about the type of imagery that's being slid in under the guise of showing something healthy or positive. This is a quote from a book called The Art of Activism. I highly recommend everybody go out and get it. It is written by the Steves, the founders of the Center for Artistic Activism. And the quote says, "As we witness the dramatic triumph of right-wing demagogues from around the world and the eclipse of truth by performative lies, it is increasingly clear that the simple presentation of facts falls upon deaf ears. If facts are to be heard and heeded," typo. If facts are to be heard and heeded, they need to be made into engaging stories and compelling images that capture people's attention and resonate with the ways they make sense of their world. They go on to say art and activism together have the superpower to change the world. Almighty God, both the artist and the deity, inspires us to use our powers for good and not evil. Right? Balance is a sacred principle. So we see how effective it is to use images to manipulate people basically into poisoning themselves in a socially acceptable manner. Well, we can also we see the use of art inspiring and motivating and being evocative and also being a catalyst for action and change. As in the case of Almighty God and Hank Willis Thomas and myself and so many other artists and arts activists. The central theme in tobacco industry tactics is manipulation. Connecting smoking of nicotine products and political freedom and justice is a manipulative idea. The idea that menthol cigarettes are the black cigarette is false. They are not part of black culture. They were marketed heavily to black people. The hiring of trusted individuals to peddle lies and trick us into voting against our interests is also part of that industry manipulation. It is financed, funded, and backed by industry profiteers. State violence against black people has been happening for about 500 years. The claim that passing legislation that restricts menthol products will increase police attention is false and seeks to play upon black fears and anxieties of future violence, right? So when you see those claims, you know that they are coming from somebody who is either working for the tobacco industry or someone who is influenced by the tobacco industry. But we can stay diligent and not fall for these same old tricks. We can also warn our brothers and sisters on the continent about what to expect because they're already employing these same tactics. And at this point, that is a perfect segue into Artie's presentation. So I'm going to hand things off to Artie. Artie, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Bianca. So it's my pleasure being here and to talk to you about big tobacco in Ghana and Africa. So I'm Artie Singh from the School of Public Health at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana. And Ghana is actually the birthplace of Almighty God. Next slide, please. So my presentation is sort of in 4 parts. So the first part will be on the tobacco in Africa, where I'll just briefly talk about tobacco use in Africa. And then I will just say a few words about the big tobacco in Africa, and especially about the big industries that work in Africa. Then I'll move ahead to talk about the tobacco in the marketing strategies and the use of predatory marketing strategies in Africa and Ghana. And then I'll zoom into Ghana, where I'll be talking about how tobacco control in Ghana has progressed over time. Next slide, please. So just as an introduction, we've seen that tobacco is really a very sort of a big global problem, and the problem in Africa has not been less, but yes, our prevalence in Africa has been much less than what it was in the Americas or the Europe or Asia. But we actually see a drift happening in the coming years, and what projections indicate is that the prevalence of smoking is actually going to be higher than what happens in Europe and America. And this is all because of the improved economic growth and the health of people that has actually improved, and that is increasing the number of smokers and the cigarettes smoked in Africa as a whole. And next slide, please. So this graph just tells you, sort of reinforces the fact that the prevalence in Africa of smoking is actually less than what it is in the other parts of the world. But this is actually now shifting, and Africa is becoming sort of a new market for the tobacco industries. We just have about 6% of the world's smokers living in Africa, and we have just 2% of cigarettes being sold in Africa globally, like what happens in the world as compared to the global picture. So that really tells you that there's a potential for the smoking rates to go up, because we do have much more smokers than the number of cigarettes that are smoked by people in Africa. Next slide, please. And one of the biggest challenges that we are facing in Africa at the moment is that the industry is actually trying all means to be able to enter the region and just use the same strategies they've used in other parts of the world. And they are actually just getting to shift their marketing strategies to the African region. As Vera Costa from the Framework Convention at the WHO states, that the tobacco industry is trying to reach the developing world with the same arguments and strategies that they were using in the developed world. Next slide, please. And the African countries have now become a major market for the tobacco industry. So we have Philip Morris International, British American Tobacco, Imperial Brands, and Japan Tobacco International. These are the four, like the big tobacco brands that are really invading the market in Africa. And they're making all the attempts to increase the supply and demand of tobacco to the African market. And recently there have been lots of evidence coming out from some leaked documents of BATs that have been worked on by researchers all over the world, especially from the UK at the University of Bath. And these documents have really revealed the strategies that BAT, for instance, is using in terms of advertising, marketing, and sales strategies in Africa. And Africa is projected to continue growing, and BAT has like sort of strongly placed itself to take advantage of that growth in these markets. And these are all from the leaked documents that have come out from BAT that have been analyzed by researchers in the UK and America. Next slide, please. And one interesting thing is that although they're using the similar strategies that they use in other parts of the world, they have some sort of double standards when it comes to the African region. So it does not operate with the same principles and mandates in Africa as it did, for instance, in Europe. So here they're trying to sell cheaper cigarettes, which are actually highly addictive cigarettes as compared to the other cigarettes in the other parts of the world. They're also trying to market that tobacco is not harmful to health, despite that large amounts of data that really shows that tobacco is definitely very, very harmful. And they have this the use of political and economic power in many parts of the region. So they try to influence lots of stakeholders and policymakers, including politicians, to influence them to enter the market in Africa. They also disseminate advertising in print, television, and media, and do all sorts of sophisticated ways of trying to lure people into smoking and making smoking look good, and the use of tobacco as not being anything harmful. Next slide, please. And some of the documents that were leaked actually reinforce all this evidence behind the fact that this the marketing strategies in some form of smuggling, actually, in at least about 40 of 54 countries in African region. So it's not something that started recently. It's been going on for many, many years now, sometime somewhere in the 1980s. And then there's this interesting quote. An African smoker was quoted as starting the habit because BAT's advertisements led him to believe smoking was a passport to prosperity, because everyone in the advertisement was wearing shoes. And this just tells you that the industries knows how to get hold of the very vulnerable and the low income smokers that really exist in many of the African region as compared to what happens in other parts of the world. But in the African region, we have many low income smokers, young, it's basically young population. So they have really a better chance of luring that vulnerable group as compared to other parts. Next slide, please. And like I said earlier, and like I think and Tracy also mentioned in her presentation, where they target these smokers in their promotional marketing, especially women and younger groups. And Africa is a young, sort of a young continent. And a very common way they do that is they sell single stick cigarettes, and these cigarettes are actually much more affordable and easy to access. And because the smokers are these low income smokers, they can easily afford single sticks as compared to 20 stick packs or 10 stick packs. And then they also sponsor youth-oriented events. They involve in violating international frameworks, even their own principles. They do not care about that. They hire these young cigarette girls to attractively endorse their products. They do a lot of corporate social responsibility in the region, and even from providing electricity to small towns or even hospital supplies to children. Next slide, please. And this is a typical example of what happens in sort of a school setting, because most of these tobacco industries, for instance, market a lot of their products around schools. And this image is just about showing how a typical school that you can see is surrounded by almost about 27 push carts and about 30 posters, 17 kiosks. So forms of tobacco use and tobacco accessibility in many ways around these schools. And that is what they do in many parts of the region. And they do that even in the developed world, but it's a very, very common practice, especially in the African region, because that's their main target, the young school going population. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows an example of how the tobacco industry really plans its way ahead of time. So it's not something that they end up saying that we're doing this now, or they've done this, like they planned. It's planning from sort of many years ago, and this slide, the figure there just shows that they have phases in which they plan that. So for instance, here they have phase one, where they thought that the phase one, they're going to include markets that would really attack the smokers in Ghana, Malawi, Sierra Leone. And in phase two, they're going to attack the markets in Kenya, Mauritius, Uganda. So it's really a planned sort of way, and it's nothing that's done all of a sudden. So they're good with their tactics. Next slide, please. And even during the COVID pandemic, and when it all started 2 years ago in 2020, this was like a big opportunity for big tobacco to really enter the African region. And they had lots of corporate social responsibility projects that they were taking part in many countries, including Ghana. And they engaged with lots of government bodies and contributed to relief efforts in terms of getting treatment centers made, donation of personal protective equipment, medications, equipments, all in an effort to enter the markets in these countries and influence political and the economic situation of the country. Next slide, please. So I'll just zoom into Ghana, because we are all here because of Almighty God's paintings and the impact it's had, especially in terms of smoking and the smoking rates in Ghana and maybe the African region as well. So Ghana is a country, small country in West Africa. It is also the home country of Almighty. And the BAT is really the main manufacturing company that existed for the past 50 to 60 years. But then they moved out of the country sometime in 2006 because the economic growth in the country was not as good as they experienced in other countries. And then Ghana also introduced an early ban on advertising, which sort of was also responsible for BAT's movement out of the country. And they didn't see their products actually being utilized the way they were in other countries in the region, because of more or less the cultural and social acceptance of smoking was not as great as other parts of the African region. So there was an overall low consumption levels at all times in Ghana relative to other richer African countries, even before and after the advertising ban was introduced. And this sort of restricted the growth of BAT in the region. Next slide, please. And if we compare Ghana to the other countries in the region, sorry about this slide, it looks quite heavily populated, but all that I'm trying to really tell you here is that the smoking prevalence in Ghana is actually much, much less as compared to what happens in other parts of other countries in the African region. So for instance, Ghana's prevalence is about 7.5% among adult males, and it was about 10 to 15% in Nigeria, about 20% in Uganda, about 15% in Kenya. Almost all the countries are ahead of Ghana in terms of their smoking prevalence of tobacco use. Next slide, please. So even with the low smoking rates in Ghana, and a country that did not accept smoking fully like the way the tobacco industries would have loved it, the president of Ghana at that time, President Kwame Nkrumah in 1957, actually went ahead to say that I should like to draw attention to an excellent example of the kind of investment we appreciate in this country. I refer to Pioneer Tobacco Company. Here is a young tobacco company working most efficiently among Africans, encouraging the growth of its raw materials. This is an excellent case scenario for private enterprise. So it just tells you that the tobacco company and the big tobacco really have a big influence when it comes to the politicians in the region, that even in a country that wasn't doing well in terms of smoking rates, they were still able to influence their political powers. And the graph on the right just shows you the extent of how tobacco growth was not the way it was in other parts of the African region. And you can see that the per capita consumption of cigarettes, as you can see the graph going downwards, we have it going downwards steeply. And then somewhere in 1982, we had advertising ban. It rose up for some time, and then it started falling all the way down until about 1998. That's where the graph ends, actually. And Almighty God's tobacco series painting started somewhere in 1993. It might have had an impact on the smoking rates in the country, so we can't be sure, but it could be a possibility that it was all in an effort for tobacco control, and it sort of reinforced the whole effort to control the use of tobacco in the country. Next slide, please. So this is just a timeline of events, just reinforcing what I have said earlier, that BAT, the tobacco control in Ghana has been quite consistent, and it's gone all the way up till now. And we've had quite a stable decline in smoking rates. So somewhere in 1948, where BAT established its cigarettes distribution depots, in 1982, there's a ban on tobacco advertising. In 1993, Almighty God starts his tobacco series paintings. 2005, Ghana ratifies the WHO's Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, all the way down to 2006, when BAT closed its factory and moved to Nigeria. Then a Public Health Act was passed in 2012. In 13, there was public smoking ban, and in 16, the tobacco regulations was introduced, where there were pictorial health warnings on tobacco packs, and also smoke-free places were introduced. And then just recently, we also ratified the illicit tobacco protocol, which really is all about tobacco smuggling and putting an end to that. Next slide, please. And like I just said recently, this is also a recent development in the country, where we introduced pictorial health warning labels in Ghana, and this have really been accepted quite well in the country. And next slide, please. So in conclusion, the reason why we're all here is Almighty God's painting and its influence in smoking, the impact it's had on smoking rates in Ghana and beyond. And it might have been one of the reasons why we've not seen the typical epidemic that we've seen in other parts of the world. And the tobacco epidemic in Ghana has really been fairly low. And maybe there was something that Almighty God's painting might have done indirectly or directly that we didn't realize. And I, as a researcher and a physician, do thank Almighty God for that innovation in terms of using art to be able to send out such strong messages on such harmful products. I thank you for the opportunity, and we welcome any questions you have. Thank you. Over to you, Erica.
Wonderful. Thank you, Artie, and thank you, Tracy. Tracy, please come on back and join us. And Artie as well, if we can. Yes, wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you both for your presentations. I mean, they were really very, very interesting. I think you brought up some, I mean, just some incredible examples and statistics that are really, thought-provoking about how strong public action as well as government action can really, really combat pervasive cigarette usage. So I'm looking at the clock, and I want to be mindful of time for us to talk, for you two to, have this moderated conversation that we prepared, but also get to some of the questions. So, it's interesting. I'm thinking, Artie, about your comment, how you brought up that Ghana had banned advertising, but, not, other countries in Africa have not done this. So I'm going to sort of pose this question to both of you, and Artie, I'm going to ask you to sort of go beyond the Ghana example, but the idea that the tobacco industry has really utilized people's fears and their hopes in this kind of advertising. You've given examples to see this historically, and I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to talk about how this is happening today. What does that look like in today's tobacco advertising world? How are those tactics still being used, and what can we look out for?
So I appreciate your point. I think if we take it's, although we see these tactics being recreated on the continent of Africa. Actually, I'm sorry, was this Artie's question? I'm just talking.
This is for both of you.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone's free to answer.
Right. Anyway, child. So it's encouraging that people are waking up to the fact that these tactics are being recycled. I also see some really strong tobacco control, anti-tobacco advocacy coming out of places like South Africa. So I think it would be healthy to do a really thorough survey of the places in Africa where tobacco control is happening, because it is happening. Africans are Africans across the board, and this isn't a generalization. This is talking about the reality of continuity. There are plenty of people on the continent of Africa who are conscious about this reality. In terms of the tactics that are being used, the theme is manipulation. So we see these ads that talk about menthol regulation being racist. We see, celebrities selling their own sort of selling vape pens and selling their own products, hoping to get them picked up, etc., by larger companies. We also see predatory marketing by companies like Backwoods, which is also owned by, as part of Big Tobacco. So they make blunt wrappers. So you see now people being sort of massaged into tobacco addiction through cannabis usage. Because obviously you can wrap cannabis and other things than tobacco products. So they have the flavored products, they have the merchandise, they have the, pop culture celebrities. So those same tactics persist. And know that back in the day, the tobacco industry executives, the heads of the tobacco companies and the tobacco companies themselves were adjudicated as racketeers. So they were found to literally be real life gangsters, because they employed gangster tactics, and it's the assertion of tobacco control specialists that they're still up to these same tactics and tricks, including buying the support of political figures, but still the same, advertisements using sex, promising sexual prowess, promising fun, friendship, prosperity, through the use of their product. Oh, sorry, and also one more thing. This promotion of ideas of use of certain type of products as being sexy and cool, like hookah. So that's the one that's sneaking up on people right now, especially in the Black community. So this people being lied to and told that the water purifies the hookah smoke, which is totally not true, or that hookah is this ancient cultural item, which Middle Eastern scholars have also debunked. So capitalizing on the fact that African American people are definitely copied in a lot of places. So you have folks who want to emulate what African American youth and African American people are doing socially. So promoting this idea as very American, or very the idea of smoking and using these products as very American through the imagery that's shared, even like popular rappers making songs about hookahs and blunt, etc. So same tactic.
Archie, do you want to chime in, or should we move on to the next question?
Oh, I think Tracy really said almost everything, but I just want to say that, yes, there's a lot of evidence now. We didn't have all this before, but now we seem to have lots of evidence in terms of the tactics that the industry is using because of the leaked documents that have come out from these tobacco companies. So we have much more to be able to control things now than before. So I think the picture is getting better, and we know there are tricks and tactics. So, and we have lots of researchers around the world that are really trying to find out more. So I think the picture looks better, and hopefully we will know the way to go because of what we're doing now.
That's such a great point about the leaked documents, and just knowing, just having all this research that we know what they're doing. So now that we have this kind of foundational research, what are some things that people can do to protect their communities from this targeting?
Okay, let me just start, and then Tracy can add on. So I think the basic thing about, for instance, the African region, the smoking is actually not really culturally and socially acceptable. At least in Ghana, I can say that. So it's something that really is frowned upon, and there's a lot of gender differences. So we have more males smoking than women. But Tracy's point about hookah and shisha use is actually the big problem now, that because of the conception that it's nice and it's fashionable and it looks cool and that. So that's another problem that's coming up. And the most of these tobacco control agencies do not see this as a problem, because it doesn't look like a typical cigarette that you hold. But now we're getting more aware of that, and the contents of that have been studied properly, and we see that it's actually more harmful than even cigarettes. So we, at least in Ghana, they're trying to put a ban on the use of shisha, and get more warning labels, trying to fix warning labels on those, just like the way we have on cigarette packs. So I think the awareness is building up. Tobacco control advocates are getting more serious with tobacco control efforts, and there's more money being pumped into tobacco control research. So I think that the picture is getting better than it was before, and we can really fight this.
So I feel like I can say that educating oneself is super important. There is an archive at Stanford University. It's the Sarita archive. Don't ask me what Sarita stands for, because I do not remember. But if you just type SRITA into the Googlescape, you can pull up the Sarita archive. So they have a wonderful sort of collection of historical collection of tobacco ads, or nicotine ads from the very beginning all the way up to today. They're Dr. Jackler and Cindy and their team there do an amazing job. There are also through the exhibition, or through the exhibit that I curated, Same Game, Different Smokers, you can get a K-12 curriculum from the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. So that's also a way to incorporate education about these products, the tactics, but also about media. When you educate children about how they're being targeted by the tobacco industry, you're also educating them about how other media targets them. And that's very important in this consumer culture where people are constantly being prompted to buy things. Also just staying in conversation with youth about these products, and supporting legislation that comes up when folks are trying to protect the priority populations and the most vulnerable communities from these products.
Tracy, I couldn't help it. I had to go and Google Sarita as you said that, and I dropped it in the chat for everyone. Anyone who wants to check that out, that looks like an incredible archive of images, because it is the power of the visual image to really change minds. So I'm looking at the clock. Of course, I mean, honestly, I have learned so much from both of you during these presentations. I have so many questions I want to ask. I don't want to take up all the time though, and I see that we have lots of questions coming into the Q&A. So I think I want to turn to some of the questions here, and the first one that I want to bring in is a question asking if you could talk, and I think this is to both of you, if you could talk a bit more about the intersection of race and gender in tobacco marketing.
So I can start in terms of the images. When you see the earlier images, it's usually women in those in positions of receiving quote unquote care. So they're having their cigarettes lit, but they were usually sort of an accessory in those early ads from like the 40s and 50s, in particular ads for of Black women. I'm talking about specifically, but overall tobacco marketing, that can be kind of true. But like the women in these early tobacco ads geared targeted toward the Black community, the women were accessories, or they were there, looking sexy with their cigarette, looking adoringly at the men or whatever. As time moved on and you had women's liberation come up, and even in the 70s with the Black Power movement, you saw more women who were like the main person, the main quote unquote character, the main subject of the image. You also saw women who were promoted as independent. And even, when you saw these ads and the woman had the cigarettes in her hands, she was like some woman in an amazing outfit, looking very strong and looking very independent. So it promoted this idea of smoke this particular cigarette if you want to be independent and show everybody that you've come a long way, baby. Even in Hank Willis Thomas's work, when he extracted these cigarettes from the ads, you saw these two fingers up being held up by these women, and it almost looked as though this was the hand symbol for feminine independence, for female independence. So definitely this sort of manipulation of an inclusion of mainstream ideas about what womanhood was and what it meant to be a woman. And but then also the manipulation of these ideas around feminine independence, and like Erica pointed out earlier, selling this idea of hope, and selling these images of hope for women who wanted to feel and be portrayed in that way.
We're running, I think we only have time for one more question. And I really love this one, because, we always love questions that lead to action. What advice would you have if folks wanted to see if they could try to work with local arts organizations in their communities to try to develop their own exhibits that explore these issues?
I would definitely say two things. One, pair up with folks like Artie, who are going to be super strong. Our public health advocates will be super strong in providing statistical data to accompany the images that are shared. They and in terms of creating your own exhibit, I would say lean on folks like the Center for Artistic Activism that teaches classes that help support you in the development of your artivist properties, maybe your exhibit or action or whatever it is you're doing. And then also look towards the Sarita archive. You can download images from there. They're available via fair use. So you can use them in your exhibits. The other thing that was mentioned was the leaked documents. So there is an entire collection, a massive collection of tobacco industry documents, advertisements, etc., that is managed by UCSF. And you can access them online as well. Dr. Valerie Yerger, who runs The Loop at UCSF and is also one of the founding members of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. She was one of the people that helped sort through all of those documents because of the Master Settlement Agreement. So that's where you can see the memos about just how deliberate the tobacco industry was in targeting folks. But those documents are worth going through, as well as the other archives.
Well, I think that that gives us quite a bit to think about, and I think we've gotten our homework. Like we all have work to go and do now, right? I want to thank both Tracy and Artie for this wonderful presentations, the conversation. You know, like I said, like I'm seeing this in the Q&A. I'm feeling it too. I feel like, you know, really energized. So thank you from me.
And thank you from me too. Thank you so much, Tracy and Artie, for joining us today and sharing your important work with our audience. It was, like Erica said, it was so illuminating. And I'm really thankful that we're all leaving this hour a little bit wiser and hipper to the methodologies that we need to resist to keep ourselves healthy. So thank you again for joining us today. And thank you to everyone in our audience who joined us. This program's been recorded and it will be available immediately on the Fowler's Facebook. And in a few days, it will be uploaded to our Instagram and to the Fowler website for you to revisit and share. If you RSVP'd for this program, you will get the link in the email following the event. So don't worry about finding that link. We'll send it right to you. And we'll hope that you'll join us for our next program. You can find details on the closing slide. In the meantime, have a great day or evening wherever you are.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.